One of the biggest gripes that any X-Men fan has is that Jonathan Hickman never really got to finish his House of X Powers at 10 run, the whole thing that was basically the brainchild of the X-Men's Krakoan age. Because he had stated before that, he had plans for was going to do it in 3 acts, and that was will be done, but he never got a chance to finish it because he exited the book after a lot of nonsense started to happen. Now, admittedly, I did not read all of it. I will freely admit that. Reason being is because at the point in time, Marvel Comics and stuff was starting to get a little too bloody aggravating for me with the crap that they were putting out. Even the X-Men weren't really in a fantastic place at that point. But when he started House of X Powers at 10, that story had some actual grit to it. So I didn't read bits and pieces of it, but what happened is that I decided, listen, I want to wait and see how things progress before I really commit to it. I really wanted to see that because there were so many interesting aspects in it. Like, what was Mr. Sinister up to? Who was the mysterious mutant that they resurrected? What was going on with the X-Men? Because they went from cold to hot pretty damn fast. And that's why everybody was thinking like, okay, this really can't be the X-Men. Because they went from X-Men to isolationist nut jobs pretty damn quick. And everybody was really hoping that maybe, the X-Men, the original X-Men were in like stasis tubes under the island, and these were like plant clones or something. See what he was hoping at, because the way the story was going, you were seeing that, there was something building here. But that didn't happen. Things went sour, and then the whole Krakoan age came and it just destroyed whatever the X-Men was supposed to be, and even now they can't recover. But Jonathan Hickman has come out and said that, that he couldn't finish that story is most likely the most disappointing creative experience he's ever had. Let's go through some of this and I'll give my thoughts as we go along. This article here from Bounding into Comics. Marvel Comics, Jonathan Hickman says X-Men's Krakoan age was his most disappointing creative experience because he couldn't finish the story. In an unfortunately apt example of the idea that you can't win them all, Marvel Comics writer Jonathan Hickman has admitted that due to events out of his control preventing him from actually closing out the ambitious X-Men story arc, he considers this work on the team's Krakoan age to be his most disappointing creative experience. An overarching storyline that ran across the entirety of the publisher's X-Men line from 2019 to 2024, the Krakoan age revolved around the idea of Professor X terraforming the sentient island of Krakoa into a universal home for all of mutant kind. In doing so, attempting to take his people out of the shadows and give them protection in the form of a Homo superior base ethnostate. Originally, Hickman planned for this storyline to be a grand 3-part epic, its narrative providing a similar status quo elevation to the X-Men that his Infinity Arc did for the Avengers. So yeah, it basically was in regards to that, where you had Professor X do that, because the whole thing with that opened with Moira McTaggart and all of that stuff, like I said, it was interesting enough that you actually wanted to see what was going to happen, what was going on. The story had some actual bite to it, so you were like, okay, all right, what's this going to happen here? What's going on? But like they stated here, Jonathan Hickman had originally planned for a grand 3-part epic, but that never came to pass. However, this epic would never come to be, as when Hickman was gearing up to move the story into its second act, he was shocked to learn that to a man, everyone wanted to stay in the first act. And you see, that might have been the part of it that was good, because what happened with it is that he was writing this epic series, right? Writing it. And then you have to, I mean, he has to take some blame, and also the Marvel office has to take some blame. Jordan White and just those doofuses were there, and they were causing our problem. Because what happened with Jonathan Hickman, when I started to hear some of the people he was bringing in to write books for this X-Men thing, that's when I started to kind of roll my eyes and go like, oh God, because he was bringing in writers like Vita Ayala to write it. And I was like, why? What has Vita Ayala ever written that was ever interesting to anybody? No. That's what you were doing. You even brought in this other girl, oh God, I forget her name. I think it's Stephanie something, whatever. I forget her name, but she was the one who did write that horrible Catwoman comic as well. She was writing Captain Britain Betsy Braddock and look at it, and the story just was going nowhere. That's what it was. They just cancel it, keep bringing it back. And the thing about it is that they didn't, as he kept bringing in these people and Jordan White and the rest of them, they didn't want to leave the first act because they found something that they could milk. You understand? People were interested in what Jonathan Hickman was doing. They were like, okay, this is interesting. Let me see. But then you had all these other crappy books that nobody asked for. Nobody was interested from writers that nobody cared about. But I say again, he has to take some blame because he brought them in. He brought them in. He approved them to write and everything like that. So that was going on there. But as the crappy books kept rolling out, but you weren't getting much of what Hickman was doing. And that's when I started to be like, yeah, oh God, this is going to go the way of what is going to go the way of. And there were people who were saying like, no, 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 Jonathan Hickman is going to do this and the other. And then he announced that, he was going to be leaving. Let me continue on here. It was really interesting. He told Entertainment Weekly in August 2021, because I appreciated the House of X resonated with them to the extent that they didn't want it to end. But the reality was that I knew I would be leaving the line early. As such, Hickman worked with Marvel Comics to reorient the entire X-Men line, thus taking his sledgehammer to his original plans for the entire Krakoa affair. This is what I'm talking about. He had a plan for what he wanted to do. It was a three-part saga of what was going to happen. But when you brought in these other people and those morons in the X-Men office, they wanted to milk that first part as much as possible. He got sick and tired of it, and he decided to leave. He could say all he wanted about, he was going to leave. He got pissed. Anybody would. And he left. But he then tried to rework it to what they wanted to do before he left. And then they just dragged that thing corpse for years. Because it was never supposed to go that way. All the story was going on just completely got smashed to pieces. And you were just left wondering what in the hell was even that supposed to be. Hickman, who has since gone on to pen the currently ongoing Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 3 and the soon-to-release Imperial crossover, reflected on his time with Marvel's Merry Band of Mutants during an appearance on the 498th episode of the comic book-centric off-panel podcast as hosted by David Harper. Fielding questions from Harper's Patreon subscribers, Hickman was at one point turned to the topic of Krakoa and asked to what, if anything, really stood out about that experience overall to you. To which he affirmed, I've said this multiple places at this point, but it is the most disappointing creative experience that I've ever had because I didn't finish the story I set out to do, which is a cardinal sin and a total bummer. Again, the man had an idea of what he wanted to do. It was a three-part saga he wanted to do, but then, as I say, he brought in people he never should have brought in. The X-Men office was staffed by a bunch of morons, and they wanted to drag the first part on because they realized they could milk it. And then when it just kept getting worse and worse, nobody wanted to take any responsibility at that point. Continues on. In my head, working the way that it works, I've tried to reverse engineer how it could have worked, he told her. But I don't think there's a version of it where it wasn't me not getting to finish it. So, it's a lot of business stuff, COVID stuff, publishing schedule stuff. Like, it was a perfect storm of really, really bummer things that just derailed the project. And so it's really, really difficult for me to talk about it or think about it in any kind of positive aspect because I would have crushed it. I would have loved to see how he would have done that whole thing. I would have really loved to see how he would have done it. But Marvel wouldn't have him do that because they dragged that for so long now, and now they're trying to act like the X-Men is still something when it wasn't. I would have loved to see what it is he would have done with that whole saga. Like if you talk to anybody who was in the room for the initial full pitch of where everything was going, I told them what the three acts were. The East of Eden co-creator recall. I reserve the right to keep stuff back as I always do, but I mean the point of the book, I was very clear about what it was. You talk to people in the room and they know what the whole thing was. Yeah, because like I say, everybody wanted to know what's going on. There were acts that was really, and the biggest thing everybody was what was that, was this really the X-Men or not? Because like I said, they went from the X-Men to isolationist nut jobs really quickly. And everyone was like, okay, I'm just hoping at this point that the real X-Men are in stasis on the Krakoa's island there, and this is some kind of plant clothes that are just going around doing this shit. That's what everybody was hoping. And that would have been a really interesting way to see how that would have turned out if he had gotten to do that, and that was the story he was going with. That would have been really fun, but no, we never got that. It's a bummer, it's a real bummer, but win some, lose some, and you move on, then admitted. Um, will say that I really love the people that I worked with during a really, really difficult time. I thought I had some banger issues, some really great X-Men moment. I just hate that I didn't get to finish it. However, despite his disappointment in being unable to properly wrap up the X-Men's island adventures, Hickman made it clear he did not begrudge anyone who subsequently handled his idea. Now, again, I have to give him credit here. He never badmouths anybody, never says that, anybody ruined anything. And I must give him credit for that. He took the high road and he did not look to make anything or say anything about anybody, anything like that. Let me read what he had to say. First of all, everybody in that office worked very, very hard. One of the reasons why I don't like talking about is that people immediately think I'm throwing shade or that I'm upset with editorial or that I'm upset with the company or that I'm upset with the other creators and all that kind of stuff. It's on me to tell the story that I'm supposed to tell. Like that's on me and the artists who are doing the book, and it just couldn't be helped. Again, like I said, he doesn't throw shade on anybody. But I am just saying what you were looking to do, when you started to bring in writers that had absolutely no business touching anything X-Men with a 10-foot pole, that was problematic. And when you could clearly see that the rest of the morons in the X-Men office were perfectly happy to milk the first thing because they found something that they could bleed dry, you knew what was going to happen. So he isn't going to say anything about anybody, but I am just saying from an outsider perspective, that was pretty stupid. That's what it was, pretty damn stupid. He continues again, I don't have any negative feelings about any of the other stuff outside of me not bringing it home. But it was complicated and convoluted, and I don't think I'll ever talk about it because I think that's shitty, I guess. There was no way around it, just a product of the time is what I would say. No, what I would say is that you had an idea, you were telling a story that people were actually interested in, and then things went bad because you let people on that had no business being there, and then editorial was perfectly happy to just run with these nut jobs and just run it right into the ground. That's what. Wrapping his thoughts on this particular question, the Marvel Comics mainstay ultimately told his host, listen, the House of X still sells really well. That trade does great. People still read that trade and years from now. And so, I'm super thrilled with the work that went into that and how it came out and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, people still read the early works of what you were doing. After you left, it took a hard nosedive because everybody saw the crap that they were trying to pass off as being somehow something. But nobody was buying it. Absolutely nobody was buying it. So yeah, Jonathan Hickman, disappointed he couldn't finish it. I'm disappointed he couldn't finish it. I'm sure a lot of other X-Men fans are disappointed he couldn't finish it, because had he gotten to wrap up his three-part arcs on what he wanted to do with Krakoa, we may have gotten an interesting story that played out a certain way, and then we could have gotten something moving forward. Instead, we got people jumping on that had no business being there, started to write a bunch of crap that nobody was interested in, and then they dragged Krakoa for years, turning the X-Men into a bunch of cold-blooded murdering sycophants. And apparently they thought that would work. It didn't. But Jonathan Hickman is still disappointed he couldn't get to finish it, and I, for one, would have loved to have read what it is he wanted to do with it. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. If you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it. If you like, you should hit that thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the notification bell to be notified every time I put out a new video. And I shall see you all next time. Take care.